We were all kind of excited the other day to receive the boxes of Samsara, Nirvana, and Buddha Nature. Published by Wisdom Publications. And Lindsay, the woman who made the cover, she's fantastic. It's so beautiful. So this is the third in the series of the Library of Wisdom and Compassion by His Holiness Dalai Lama that I'm assisting with. And the first volume, Approaching the Buddhist Path, was an introductory volume talking about a lot of the things that are very interesting to Westerners and non-Tibetans that they don't necessarily teach you when you're starting out Dharma practice. And then the second volume continued with some of the introductory topics, and then we started getting into precious human life and death and rebirth. And then there's a big section on karma in that book, really trying to go into it. And then this is the third volume. Second volume was Foundation of Buddhist Practice. This is the third volume. And so this one is really going into the Four Truths, true dukkha, sometimes translated as true suffering, but that's a bad translation, true origins, true cessation, and true path. So this book starts out with, first of all, the picture on the front is of from a very famous tanka that one king at the time of the Buddha or soon thereafter gave to another king. The other king looked at it and then instantly, or well, maybe not instantly, but soon thereafter understood dependent origination and how we get born in samsara again and again. And the tanka, so it illustrates that with the animals of a pig and a cock and a snake. In the center, the 6 realms depicted around that, and then the 12 links of dependent arising on the outer rim, and this is being held by the Lord of Death. Okay, but when we made the cover, we didn't put the whole tanka in because we wanted to emphasize the Buddha standing in the corner here above the Lord of Death, pointing to the moon. Okay, so the Buddha is there and pointing out the path to liberation to us. Yeah, so this, tanka, which is often on the doors of Tibetan monasteries to remind you when you go in, why you're practicing the Dharma. So the tanka explains, how we take rebirth and how we stop that cycle of rebirth and samsara. Okay, so the chapters in the book, it starts out the self, the 4 truths, and there's 16 attributes. And so in there, His Holiness talks about a conference that he went to with some people of various religions. And one of the questions was about the self. What is the self? What caused the self? What happens to the self? And so he talks about the Buddhist take on that. Then we go into evolving and cyclic existence and the truth of dukkha, or truth of suffering. Then the third chapter on the origins of dukkha, and here we talk about all the different kinds of afflictions that there are. Karma was talked about in the previous volume. Then chapter 4 is more about afflictions, how they arise, and then talking about some of their antidotes. Chapter 5 is about afflictions and karma, and then talking about seeds and latencies of both affliction and karma, because they aren't the same. Okay. Chapter 6 is about karma, the universe, and evolution. And this chapter comes from many years ago, many, many years ago, like 20, 30 years ago, I requested an interview with His Holiness. And I asked him about karma and how it relates to the universe, because one of the results of karma, they say, is the environment that we live in. So I was very curious, well, how does karma create the environment? And His Holiness' response is very good, and it revealed a lot of misconceptions that we often have. Like, we'll think, oh, karma created the trees, or karma created the earthquake, and it's not like that. These are things happen because of biological, chemical, physical systems of cause and effect. Karma has to do with our being there and enjoying in those things. Okay? So it's not that karma made the earthquake. Karma was us being present when the earthquake, or not being present when the earthquake. Okay, so it's a very interesting chapter where His Holiness really talks about his ideas, because it's not so explicitly laid out in the scriptures. Okay, then chapter 7 is about the 12 links of dependent origination. So that's the tanka on the cover. Chapter 8 is about how the 12 links produce a life. And then here we get the perspective, and also in the preceding chapter, from both the Pali tradition and the Sanskrit tradition, which pretty much accord in their description of the 12 links of dependent origination. But there's, some interesting perspectives that help expand our mind. Chapter 9 is the determination to be free. So, wanting to be free of the cycle. And in it, there's one section called, Can a Leper Find Happiness? And this refers to a sutta in the Pali Canon, where they're comparing, a leper who has these incredible injuries, because the virus or bacteria, whatever it is eating away at their flesh. And it's very painful for them and very itchy. And what relieves the pain is putting it in fire, cauterizing it. And, and yet you put your painful limb in a fire to cauterize it, it relieves the temporary pain, but increases the long-term, illness and risk of infection and so on and so forth. And so that's compared to those of us in Samsara who, we really want something, we need something, we have to have it, we get it, we go all out and we manipulate and do whatever we need to do to get it. Yeah, but in doing so, we create negative karma that then keeps us more bound in samsara again and again. And so, that analogy, I remember when I read the sutra, it was so powerful, just meditating on that analogy, because, that's really what it's like. Okay, then chapter 10 is seeking genuine peace. And so talking about the forward and reverse methods or orders of the afflictive and the purified sides of the 12 links. And then chapter 11 is, the freedom from cyclic existence. Okay, so, what are the obscurations? What is nirvana? What is awakening? And so here again we have the Pali take on nirvana, the Sanskrit take on nirvana. And here we start to see some differences, but also some similarities. It's quite interesting. I found that part very, very interesting. Then chapter 12, 13 and 14 are getting into the Buddha nature and the mind and its potential. So again, the clear and cognizant nature of the mind, how liberation is possible, okay? You know, how we can cultivate excellent qualities limitlessly. Some of this comes from Pramnavartika, from Dharmakirti. It also explains a phrase we hear very often called the equality of samsara and nirvana. You know, and people throw that around a lot. You know, oh, samsara and nirvana, they're equal. Yeah, there's no good, there's no bad, there's no virtue, there's no non-virtue. Samsara and nirvana are equal. You know, this type of very nihilistic misunderstanding that people have. So it explains that saying samsara and nirvana are equal means that they're equal in being empty of inherent existence. But there's a big difference between being in samsara and being in nirvana. Okay, big difference. And if you don't see that difference, then it's going to be trouble for you, you know. Okay, then 13 is getting into the Buddha nature according to the Pali tradition, according to the Vaibhasika tenet system, the Sautrantikas, the Chittamadra, the Madhyamika school, and then also Tantra. And this chapter and the next chapter about Buddha nature, which also talks about Dzogchen and Mahamudra and fundamental innate mind of clear light. This was, during the interviews with His Holiness, was one of the most astounding, I thought, times with him, because he pulled out a text from, I think it was the 7th Dalai Lama, and started reading it. And the 7th Dalai Lama, you know, is a typical Galupa, you know, teacher, but he's talking about Tantra, and he's really showing how the perfection vehicle position about Buddha nature leads you into Tantra, and how, you know, Tantra, yeah, and then he relates it to the other schools that, you know, not just the Gelupa, but also, like I said, Dzogchen and Mahamudra. And it's just, listening to him was just incredible, you know, because it's again, His Holiness is a genius of how he can take things and relate this to that and connect things that when he explains it, it's quite clear, but you never thought yourself of connecting those things in that way. Yeah. And yet that's exactly how he does it, and really shows how the, you know, in the 3 turnings of the Dharma wheel, you know, how the second, which emphasizes the prajna paramita, you know, and explains true cessations, how that gets you into the 3rd Dharma wheel, yeah, which is talking about Buddha nature, but also explains the Chittamadra teachings, which are 2 kind of different themes in the 3rd wheel. So it's just fascinating. Yeah, so I'm really hoping that people will read it and benefit and be as enthused about the teachings as I was.